game under the new rules. The Knickerbocker-Cartwright rules was played in June of 1846 at the Elysian Fields between the Knickerbockers and the New York Club, which was a team of cricket players who had decided to take up some baseball. And it was the first evidence of gamesmanship in baseball history, because the captain of the New York Club decided that since Cartwright was the Knickerbockers' best player, he'd take him out of the game. So he proposed, of course, once they had started playing these new rules, they needed an umpire. Under the old town ball rules, a runner was put out by hitting him with the ball. And it was said there was no need for an umpire, because when a boy got hit in the seat of his pants, he knew he was out and there was no argument. But now with this 90-foot field, they found that a ground ball that was cleanly fielded by a fielder and thrown to first base would get there just ahead of a fast batter. So it turned out that the 90 feet was perfect for men playing baseball, and women later in the 20th century. But the captain of the New York club said, I want Mr. Cartwright for the umpire, because he's the one who drew up the rules. Who's better qualified than him? Plus, we know he'll be impartial and he won't, play favorites. So by taking the Knickerbockers' best player out of the game, the New York club won by a score, I think it was something like 23-1. In those days, there was no set number of innings. The game ended when one side had scored 21 runs. And it was also another first that day that the Knickerbockers had made a rule that a fine would be assessed on any player who swore during the game. So Cartwright fined his friend Davis 6 cents for using foul language. But the game, that game drew a big crowd of interested spectators. And the game grew so rapidly in Manhattan and Brooklyn over the next few years that by the early 1950s, baseball teams were springing up all over. And it was really an exciting time. And of course, the gamblers were lurking in the wings. But big crowds were showing up for these match games. The Atlantics and the Putnams and the Eckfords and the Knickerbockers and 4 or 5 others. After the game, they would usually, both teams would sit down to a banquet. So it was really a fun time. And the game started to spread up the Hudson to Albany and Troy and south to Philly and even toward the west, except in the area around Boston, where the young sports stuck to what was called the Massachusetts game, which was a really crude version. It was played on sort of a U-shaped field. And you could have anywhere from, from 11 to 14 players on a side. It was really a chaotic thing, but it was their game, and they didn't want any part of the New Yorkers. Until about 1856, a man named Saltzman, who had played on the New York Gothams, moved to Boston. And when he saw what was going on in and around Boston Common, he was disgusted. So he started teaching his friends the Knickerbocker rules. And the next year, a baseball club called the Tri-Mountains decided to play, they were going to play the New York rules, the new rules. Trouble was they couldn't find anybody to play, so they had to just play among themselves. Then the next year they discovered that a team in Portland, Maine was using the New York rules, so they arranged for them to come to Boston to play in the Boston Commons. So the Maine boys got on the train in Portland and came down, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people showed up for this thing, probably to jeer at this silly New York game. But once they saw how great it was, that was the beginning of the end of the Massachusetts game. Now, Cartwright was not around to see his game spread. The fact of the matter is, and nobody's going to believe this, but it's true, the man who invented modern baseball was the first fire chief of Honolulu, Hawaii. When the news of the 1849 gold rush in California reached New York, Alec Cartwright and his brother, at that time they had a stationery business, which they sold. They decided they're going to go out to California and get rich. So the brother went by boat, which at that time meant going all around the end of South America and up the Pacific that way. There was no Panama Canal. And Cartwright and some of his friends got themselves a covered wagon and started heading west across country. And he wrote in his journal that he'd taken with him his own bat and the original ball that they'd used on Murray Hill. And on rest stops along the way, when they stopped to fix the wagon or buy supplies or whatever, they would start to get him out and start teaching baseball to whoever wanted to learn. He wrote in his journal, he said it was hilarious to see mountain men and Indians playing the game. Well, Cartwright made it out to California, and he ended up in Lodi, which is next door to Stockton, which is the Mudville of Casey at the Bat fame. And back in 1969, John Fogerty put Lodi on the map with a song of that name, "Oh Lord, stuck in Lodi again." But when they got there, the gold rush was over. It had taken them something like 6 months to get across the country. The gold rush was over. So they realized there was no money to be made and headed for San Francisco. Well, they didn't leave their heart there. Things weren't all that much better. And Cartwright's brother caught up with him there. His ship came in. So Cartwright decided, well, I'm not going to go back across country. I'm going to see what else we can do. He ended up getting on a ship going to Hawaii, which of course at that time was an independent kingdom, but had a lot of business dealings with the United States. So his brother wrote home from California about Alex Cartwright. He said, "Where do you think he's gone now?" "To the Sandwich Islands." So Cartwright fetched up in Hawaii. Meantime, he left his wife and 3 young children back in New York because he didn't want to haul them across the country. When he got to Hawaii, he made a friend very quickly of Queen Emma. And before long, Queen Emma had appointed him financial advisor to the royal family, which was not a bad job. And he opened up a ship chandlery business, so he sent money back to New York for his wife and children to join them, which they did. And in 1851, so the family was back together again. And so by that year, he's laying out baseball fields in Hawaii and teaching the game, to the islanders, while the good folks in Boston are still mired in the dark ages of the Massachusetts game. And another thing that Cartwright had noted when he got to Honolulu was that there was essentially no fire protection. So when a fire got started, half the street would burn. We got to do something about this. So we approached Queen Emma and said, you know, it's time for a fire department in this town. So she said, fine, go ahead, send to California for whatever equipment you need, and I'll pay for it, and get some of our fine, strong young men and get a fire department trained and going, which he did, so that he became the first fire chief in Hawaii, in Honolulu, from 1850 to 1859. And he spent the rest of his life out there, and he died in 1892, a very wealthy man of 72, but forgotten in the United States.